And this webinar is actually a very special one because it's about the situation that some of you have experienced in the past week. I'm sure that some of the sessions where you were supposed to go, or you organized, or you looked forward to be an editor at that session or media team member, one of those sessions most probably got cancelled or postponed. And the same situation Kseniya experienced when she was head organizing the session, and it was an international session. So it was a big disaster, actually. But she will tell you how actually the whole situation evolved and why it wasn't in the end as dramatic as it felt from this first moment, and what you can do out of the session that got cancelled or postponed. And the great thing about current crisis is that hopefully someday all of the sessions that got postponed will indeed take place. But with your session, it was different. One of the organizational things, please keep your microphone switched, but all of you did it already. And whenever you want to ask a question, then you have to unmute yourself. And Kseniya will be also showing us presentation, and she will now introduce herself and tell us a few things about what she's doing. So yes, Kseniya, feel welcome and go ahead.
I hope you can see my first slide, guys. Hello. Thanks a lot for joining the webinar. I hope it will be useful for you, and it will bring you some interesting ideas in this challenging and also very interesting times. So indeed, I was in EYP since 2010, and I think my active involvement ended with this session that I will be talking to you about with Agora and Security Kyiv in 2014. And currently, I'm originally from Ukraine, but currently I live and work in Munich at the European organization called EIT Health. And we work with enabling innovation in healthcare in Europe. As you can understand, it's kind of a also interesting and challenging time for our organization because a lot of our partners, we have a large network of partners of over 150 partners, and many of them are now in the forefront of fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. I will not talk about that per se in my presentation, but feel free to ask me questions afterwards. So yes, I will talk today about times of uncertainty and how they can drive innovation on the example of the event that I co-organized in 2014 called Agora and Security Kyiv. But before that, I need to full disclosure, it's not an original content. I already gave a similar presentation in December for the participants of the Innovation Lab of EYP. And back then, we did an exercise at the beginning of my presentation where I asked everyone to name or to list on a piece of paper 6 elements needed to organize an EYP event. And participants listed those 6 elements, let's say, in this order that we have on the screen. And after that, I asked them, please cross out item number 3 on your list, and then try to organize a session without that element. And this was an exercise focused on looking at the creativity and, you know, setting the mode of kind of providing an example of what happened with the event that I co-organized in 2014. And what was interesting for me, because I really thought that this exercise will bring up some creativity and out of the box thinking. But in reality, I got 2 reactions. First one was creative problem solving when participants came up with, it was literally half of the group that started coming up with different ideas of how to solve this situation. For example, how to organize a session not having a venue or not having participants. And another part of the group kind of was ready to fail. They told me that they think that it might be possible to organize an event or a session without this important element that they listed as the third in their list, but most probably the quality will be not as good, or the session will be a failure. And I wanted to encourage you with my presentation today to think more on the creative problem solving side and think about how this limitation or change in the circumstances can spark creativity, not become a barrier to your success. I wanted to, before I start talking about Agora and Security Kyiv, I just wanted to bring all of you back to 2014 and what was happening back then in my native country, Ukraine. Maybe some of you don't know or don't remember. We had some protests in late 2013 when our back then president decided not to sign the association agreement with the European Union, and he turned into this direction of Russia, and many people, especially young people, they didn't like this move, and they went out on the streets and they started protesting. This protest was it was very strong and very, it started in November and it lasted till February 2014. It went through different stages. It was, at first it was peaceful, a protest, and then it started to get a little bit violent, and at the end it ended up in February when special forces shot almost 100 people on the central square of my native city, Kyiv. That was something very dramatic for all of us, and it was something that was a very strong emotion and very strong event that happened in the history of my country. And after that, our back then president fled the country. The new government came in, we had elections, but at the same time, Crimea was annexed by Russia, and we started, the war started in the east of Ukraine. So basically, this is where we were at the beginning of 2014, the year that I will be talking about. So if you can somehow generally call this time of uncertainty, probably is a very mild definition of where we were. And just to give you a perspective of the ASK history, ASK is the shortened acronym for Agora and Security Kyiv. It was supposed to be an international session. So in autumn 2012, Kyiv was selected to host the 77th international session of EYP. In early 2014, as I said, all of these dramatic events happened. We had a war in the east, Crimea was annexed, and so on. In April 2014, governing board of EYP decided to cancel the 77th international session. By that time, the session already had part of the funding fundraise, it had an organizing team, it was supposed to have, obviously, participants selected by the national committees. So some things were already in place for the session. And that's why in June, July, it was confirmed that instead of the 77th international session, Kyiv will host international forum, but it will have a limitation of age limit for the participants of 18 years old, because of course we didn't want to have minors traveling to Ukraine because of all of these circumstances. And this is where I joined the team. I should say that my partner, Anya Supronenko, she was driving this whole process since 2012. And I joined just when the ASK was born as it was, as international forum, and not an international session in June, July 2014. And it took place in November the same year. So this is a short story, and I will tell you what happened between June, July, and November of 2014, how we took this remaining or what was left of the international session, and how we turned it into a completely different type of event. And first, I wanted also to address an elephant in the room, right? What the hell does the Agora mean by such a strange name? It was a name that came up from our wonderful president, Martin Hoffman, who suggested this name, and we really liked it. Agora comes from ancient Greek, and it was a spot in Greek city-states. It means the meeting place, the gathering place, the place where it was the center of athletic, artistic, spiritual, and political life in the city. So we actually thought that this is a very good representation of what we want Agora and Security, our event, to be. And that's why we took the name. And it also had a very nice acronym, ASK, that also kind of matched our vision. So why ASK is different? How did all of these circumstances that we had, all of these changes, the age limit, which basically pushed us, we were left in June, we were left without any participants. How did it help us to innovate? So of course we came to the task of organizing this international event with creativity and also with a strong mission. We selected security as a topic of the event, and we also wanted to have a strong academic focus of the event because we knew that the participants will be a little bit older. We had mostly university students, early professionals as our participants, and we wanted it to be a learning event for them. So we put a focus on academic side. We also used this idea in our communications. On the left, you can see one of my favorite communication materials. Well, we looked at all the women defense ministries that they are in the different countries. And it was also a learning for us. So throughout the preparation, we learned many interesting things on security. Yes, so we selected security topic not just like that. It was very relevant to Ukraine and to the whole European community at that time. It was very close to us personally. For example, if you know this Maslow pyramid, right, with the human needs, right, from the basic to the higher human needs, I think the second level there is security or safety. And I never did really understood it. Why is it so important? And then only when we had the revolution and we had at times during that period when it was not safe to be in some parts of the city, or when people were shot at the central square of my native city, that's when I felt how security is important, and that when we have it, we don't feel it, and when we don't have it, we really understand how important it is. And that's why kind of it was also a very topic that we felt very close to our skin, very passionate about. But we did not want to look at the security only from a defense or military perspective. We looked at it from the different angles. So here you can see the different working groups that we had. So we spoke about financial, environmental, military, health, governance, energy, cyber, trade, and agronomy security. So we really took it wider and looked at the topic from many, many different sides. And that's actually was one of the one of the innovations was that the moderators, or so-called chairperson, we called the moderators, they had a lot of freedom in designing their topics. So they also not only they took the topic and then they found what's interesting and what they feel passionate about in that specific topic, and they tailored it in that direction. So that's why I think everyone in the process was interested and passionate about security. We also we also had to communicate, of course, to the outside world that and now Kyiv is the safe place to go. It was not at some point of time, of course, when the in February when the events happened, but already at summer and in November, it was back to normal. We had, of course, we obviously had war in the east, but it was more than 500 kilometers from the capital. So we wanted to be responsible. At the same time, we also wanted to show that you should not be, yes, we're going through the hard times, but you should not be afraid to go to Kyiv, because Kyiv is safe. We had a worry, obviously, that since we had to recruit from zero, we didn't have any participants when we started organizing Ask in summer. We were partially nervous that we will not be able to attract and recruit good participants and good moderators, but at the end everything worked very well, and we had wonderful participants and very, very good moderators. Of course, we also had to get creative and innovate since, as I said, we had to recruit and look for participants older than 18 years old. Not EYP community has different ages, but we also decided to get out of EYP community, and we're looking for participants just in the European Student Network. We were basically reaching out to some nonprofits all around Europe to try to get some participants interested specifically in the security topic, and that would want to get to know EYP. And yes, at the end, we had 49% of participants from non-EYP world, and of course, obviously, all of them were older than 18 years old or older. We also innovated a little bit with the vocabulary, since we had so many participants that were not familiar with EYP. We also had actually one moderator who has never been to an EYP session. I think we also had one representative from the media team, and also a couple of organizers who have never been to the EYP event. That's why we wanted to use the words that would be understood by everyone. That's why we didn't have chairpersons, we had moderators, we didn't have committees, we had working groups, we didn't have journalists, we had media team, although we still had organizers, so that stayed unchanged. But we really wanted to make it language and vocabulary that you use also really shapes basically it creates the mood, and it can help you or it can play against you. So we decided to use the language that will be understood by the people outside of EYP. We also innovated with the formats, with the learning formats. I will talk here about the 3 learning formats that we used: bar camp, morning lectures, and World Cafe. And maybe this is something that will be interesting in your events that you will be organizing. So bar camp was, we called it Unconference, that offers learning in the peer-to-peer format. So participants, when they were invited, when they were selected to participate in Ask, they could suggest some topics for which they would do workshops. At the end, we selected 10 workshops, 10 presentations, and we had 2 rounds of presentations. So simultaneously, we would have, for example, 5 presenters in different rooms, and they had 45 minutes for their presentation and Q&A. And then it was a very free format. You can go from room to room, or you can stay in one room for the full duration of the session. And then after 45 minutes, we would have another set of lectures or workshops. And it was very rewarding, and it was very interesting, because basically participants, they created this, the content, they created the learning opportunity themselves. And I will talk to you a little bit more about one special session that we did during this Bauer camp and how it influenced me personally. Another format was World Cafe. Maybe you are already familiar with this format. We had basically 9 tables with 9 topics. They were roughly in line with our working groups topics. And then we had each of the table had a moderator and an expert, invited expert, and participants were basically sitting around the table, discussing the topic, sharing their ideas. A moderator would note down the ideas on the table, and then after a certain period of time, they would switch between the tables. We tried to organize and orchestrate it the way that there are not the same people on the tables all the time. So every time when you switch, you have a different group of people. And then the moderator from the table briefs you what the previous group discussed and what kind of topics or what kind of questions they raised, what kind of issues they raised. And in this way, you basically learn about the different topics in a very kind of intense format. You also get to interact with an expert, with your peers, and it was kind of a rapid exchange of ideas, and it helped to enrich their thinking about the topics of security. And then I think my favorite format, it was very straightforward, and it was a very easy idea that we had. We thought, okay, how else can we enforce this learning element in Ask? And then we said, okay, what about, we have some time in the morning, what about having morning lectures? And we put the morning lectures, I don't remember, maybe it was like from 8 till 9 or something like that in the morning. We also opened them for external audience. So we had a separate registration form where some people just interested in the topic from, I don't know, from around the city, they could register and come and still have this learning experience. And actually morning lectures were a hit. I did not expect that we would have so many participants and also external people interested in the topic and also willing to come early in the morning before the working day starts or before another day of Ask starts and learn something new. So if you have a chance to implement it in one of your events, I don't know, for us, it was a very, very successful experience. And the final results that our working groups delivered, they were presented at the symposium. So they wrote not a typical resolution that you would write at the EYP session. It was more of a final report when they wrote what they learned, some of the ideas of solving the issue, but in really like in less formal but more descriptive format. And if you're interested, the final reports are actually available online, so you can go and see how they looked like, and how the final result, how the final report looked. A couple of words about the team. As I said, when the international session was cancelled, part of the organizing team basically left because, of course, some people were working for 2 years on organizing an international session, and maybe they were not interested in organizing just an international forum, or they had other circumstances and so on. So when I joined, we had maybe half of the team in place, and then we had to look for another half. In total, we had 18 team members, 18 organizers in our team, and then we had to look for those people basically in EYP. We formed a team that was based on motivation, not on experience. We had a couple of some people that organized a session for the first time in their lives, but because of the structure that we provided and the coordination, I think it was great. We were really more interested in having motivated people, driven people, than people with a lot of experience, but maybe that will not be so hungry to organize the best session in their lives or the best event in their life. We also, at the very beginning, because our team was a little bit, it was partially remote. My co-organizer, by the way, we didn't have head organizers, right? We had two co-organizers, two project managers. We called ourselves project managers. Myself and Anya, we were in different countries at that point of time. We had overall organizers from 4 different countries, and even in Ukraine, some of our organizers were in different cities. So we had a team that was really kind of spread around, and in order to get to know each and every person in the team, before actually starting an organizing process, we had individual calls. Anya and I, we split kind of the people, and we had individual calls with them to learn about them and to learn about their motivation. We actually wrote notes. Notes are very important, guys, when you speak with, even if you think that this is like a soft call just to get to know each other, please take notes, because then we took notes of everything that they told us, of their why they want to organize an event, which role they want to have, what they want to try, what they want to learn, and so on, what they're nervous about. And then it really helps us to manage the team spirit and the team motivation throughout this whole process. Because if we didn't know, okay, what's happening, we then would go to the notes and understand, okay, this is the person's motivation, then we can maybe help them in this way or that way. Then we also came up with Ask Me game, when we randomly split our organizers in pairs, and we asked them to come up with 3 questions, plan a call, ask those questions, and then present each person to the team. Basically, we didn't want to, Anya and I, through the calls with the organizers, already knew everyone, but we wanted them to get to know each other. We wanted those interconnections, those connections between the team members, not kind of top down, but on the horizontal level. Then, of course, we had regular calls with the team leaders. I will talk in a bit how the structure of the organizing team was, how the team was organized. We had 4 team leaders that had their own little teams, and we had regular calls with the team leaders, but we also had weekly updates for the full team that we provided at first using email, then it switched to the videos to make it more personal, and then we switched back to the emails. We also asked throughout this whole process feedback from the team. What is the best way for them to get updates? What do they read? What they don't read? Which channels are the best for organizing, and so on. It's also very important to get the feedback on what works, what doesn't work in the organizing process. We had bi-weekly social events, so-called happy hours. Of course, in Corona times, maybe it's not that easy to organize, but you can be creative and think about, I don't know, coffee chats or something like that, or you can have movie screenings together online. I don't know. You can come up with different things. Every happy hour, each of the teams was responsible for organizing one happy hour. They were basically rotating, and it was also like a little bit of event organizing, because they had to came up with an idea of what we're doing for this happy hour, where we go, and it was also a great team building activity. And we also had 2 in-person organizing meetings when we flew in everyone from the different countries, different parts of the country. And we had very intense days of planning, thinking about all of the details, visiting the venues, and so on. And Anya and I really were focused on putting the feedback system in place. So we had a session of feedback with all of the team leads during the organizing process, and one afterwards. The team leaders also had feedback sessions with their with their little teams, one-on-ones, of course, individually, where they provided feedback on the person's work, and then they kind of better aligned on the expectations and all the kind of satisfaction of each team member in their work. So this is how our team was organized. We had 2 project managers, myself and Anya. We had 4 teams, PR, HR, food and supply, and then venues. As we learned in the process, PR and HR, those are very clear functions, very clear teams, and it worked pretty well in this structure. But food and supply and venues, sometimes they had overlaps. So at the end, food was ordered sometimes in addition to the venue. So we would order, for example, a hotel, and then the breakfast would go with the hotel. And then if we organize some other event in the hotel, we use their conference center, then we also use catering from the hotel. So if I would do it for a second time, I would probably add food to the venues, and then have supplies separately. We also did one thing when we didn't want everyone, you know, this looks quite hierarchical, this scheme, but we didn't want it to be too hierarchical. And we wanted people, I don't know, organizer 1 to speak with organizer 10 and organizer 3, and speak with organizer 4, and also understand what everyone is doing, and also have kind of a good team spirit and no work in silos. So we also mixed them up. We mixed them for the event. For example, each of the large events like opening ceremony, Euro concert, Ukrainian night, and so on, we had a separate little sub-team with a leader, and then a small organizing team where we mixed everyone up. And people, of course, could kind of say where they want, in which team they want to work, which event they want to organize. We really tried everyone to have their own little responsibility, right? To be responsible, to be in charge of something. So not to always be, you know, like just a person to whom everything is delegated, but also be in charge. And it worked pretty well. I think everyone was at the end very happy with having this dual role. So not only being in the very defined teams, but also being responsible or contributing to organization of events during the forum. So for me, here I think I went over time a little bit. So let me speed up. Main highlights for me is managing a wonderful organizing team in 4 different countries. This picture is from our first organizing meeting that we had at the near Kyiv, and this was the Independence Day of Ukraine. So everyone is wearing the traditional embroidered shirt. Then, as one of the bar camp sessions, we were approached by United Nations Development Program, and they kind of supported one of the topics on healthcare. And we had HIV positive teenagers that shared their stories during the bar camp. And this was a very touching experience for some of the teenagers. It was the first time when they kind of came out and spoke about their experience of how it is to live with HIV positive status. And it really touched me personally. Then we invited those guys to our Euro concert, so they hang out with us for a little bit more. So it was a great experience. And then, of course, my best partner in crime, Anya. It was wonderful experience organizing the event with her. We kind of have different personalities and different leadership styles, but we tried to build on our strengths. So Anya is very detail oriented, and she's also very strong in like looking to, I don't know, 5 steps ahead, planning everything to a small detail, building structures. And I was back then more of like the softer side, team spirit, creativity, writing like a very inspiring text, messages to the team or to the outside world, you know. So we really combined this like kind of our approaches, and it worked very, very well. To sum up, in times of uncertainty, get creative. It's an opportunity to do something interesting, and it's an opportunity to get out of the box. Not necessarily it means that it is a barrier and will lead to the failure. Work on things that you're passionate about, that are close to your skin, because this will pull you through the hard times. And then find a partner with complementary skills and build your work on each other's strengths. And just to end up with the quote of one of my favorite TED Talks from Jamie Lerner. He's a mayor of Curitiba. It's a Brazilian city. So he spoke how he built, how he innovated and basically changed the city to a very livable, nice city with a focus on people. And he said that creativity starts when you cut a zero from your budget, or better too. So get creative. And with this, I will open the floor for the questions. Helena, how do we do it? Do we just, does everyone need just to unmute themselves, or? I don't hear you. You're muted.
Yes. So exactly this is what you should do. If you want to ask a question, then you can unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself.
Maybe not per se a question. Hello, first of all, to everyone. Some of you know me, I'm sure. But I really liked your presentation, and it sort of brought back so many feelings about both EYP, but also I realized, whoa, this is so much like when you start a tech company. There's pretty much so many of the same considerations. The way you chose your teammates is pretty similar. After all, when you start a tech company, and the thing is basically that nobody knows what they're doing really, because nobody has ever done it before. Otherwise, there's no innovation. And so this is really, really interesting way to see how this overlaps. Thank you very, very much for this presentation.
Thanks a lot for this feedback. And maybe just to add to that, also a couple of words from my current position in EIT Health. What happens now, maybe you see with the COVID pandemic, there are so many challenges that arise from this new situation, but at the same time, you will see that there's so much innovation and so many people that come together that don't know how, like maybe don't have experience. Maybe this never happened in their lifetimes, but they just come and they try to solve the issue. These hackathons that were organized, a couple of hackathons that I heard about happening last week or last weekend. I know scientists coming together, also trying to solve the problem. So it's also a way, and that's also definitely the approach of the startups. When they see the need, maybe they don't know how to solve it, they just come and they try to find a way to solve it, to find a solution to the need.
Okay, so there is a silence.
Actually, I have a question.
Oh, great. Yes. Go ahead.
I was just not sure whether my computer was malfunctioning because of the silence or whether there was actually a silence. So my question is very basic, perhaps, but what were the first steps you took when the news sort of broke that you had to basically change the whole planning of your event? Because you're talking obviously in retrospect, and it's really interesting, but you probably didn't have this plan right away.
Yeah. Yes, I remember. So as I said, Anya was the one driving the international session from 2012. And she called me somewhere in June, or I think June 2014. And she said, hey, do you want to organize with me this international forum? And I said, let me think. And then I said, yes. And we started with basically, first understanding where we stand, right? So we had some of the funding, we had part of the organizing team. I think by then we already had a president confirmed, and then we just started working with that. We had a call with the president. We spoke with him what can be and I think we already knew the topic, that it will be security. So we just started with what we have, and then we started building on that, right? So we started building the team, just calling people, understanding first if they want to continue, then how many people we need to get more, trying to speak with people find people who would want to join the team. Then I think we even opened like a small call for organizers. And then, of course, there are a number of streams of work, right? When you organize an event, you understand that there is a stream of basically content, right? So everything that president really is helping on this element. But we, for example, in our case, we also were involved in shaping the content part, which was also excellent. So we knew we were involved in all of these innovative formats. We were involved in looking for the experts of helping to shape the topics. For example, this UNDP partnership that we did. Then there is a PR element, right? So you need to prepare the communication, the booklet, there is HR element, and so on. So you just kind of start working in each of the elements, understand what is there already, what you need to do. I think one of the first steps that we also did was when we understood basically the concept of the session, we understood the dates, then we started writing the call for participants, and then we just launched the call just to start looking for the people. And then in parallel, we were finishing the moderators team. I think some of the organizers were still joining, so it was really like identifying the most pressing needs in terms of the timeline. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, no, you did. I just, maybe one small follow-up question was, how did you deal with this? You probably felt things like
Yeah.
disappointment, like
Mm-hmm.
anger, sadness. How did you did you deal with that in a way with the group, or did you have other channels of support? What did you do to make sure that you were mentally okay?
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks. It's a very important question, especially sometimes you can feel very lonely being like on the leadership positions. Luckily, I had Anya, who is my partner in crime. And I think this whole experience was harder for her because basically it was her baby, her dream to organize an international session. And then it got canceled. So I think in a partnership, or if you're two people co-organizing an event, it's very interesting to support. It's very important to support each other. And I think in this setting, I was kind of less emotionally invested in everything that happened before. So I joined with like this new energy. For me, it was just a new event. For Anya, it was this whole previous experience. And of course, we spoke with each other and we supported each other. And I think this was the strongest channel of support, because we always were there for each other. And at the end, somehow we pulled through. At the same time, I understand that not everyone will be so lucky, to have, first of all, I think I was quite naive, so I didn't know what I was getting into. So I think I was like super optimistic and like took things as they went. And I had my partner, Anya. But if you, for example, go through those hard times, and as I had in other projects and in other work circumstances, it's always very important to have this support, whether in your colleague, in your partner, or it can be a friend or your life partner or your family, so someone with whom you can speak. And of course, also your personal kind of mental health habits. I did meditation. I still do, not as diligently as back then, but I did jogging, which helped me to relax. So I had my family who supported me greatly. So I think things like that help. I think in different circumstances, it's a little bit different depending on what you need and kind of where you are at which stage of life.
Thank you for answering my questions and for the whole presentation, for the whole webinar.
Sure. I hope I mean, those are, I think, maybe very general answers, but I don't know, these are the things that helped me. So yeah, I hope in your organizing journey it will be, you also will have this kind of great partners, great colleagues, and also support of the people you love, and your own mental strength, that sometimes we lose it, as in times like these, right? So many people, it's very hard to stay at home. Some of my colleagues struggle because they have kids, others struggle because they are alone, so it's important to also find your ways to stay strong.
I also had a question. So you talked about how you kind of changed the approach you had for the session, as in like changing how you communicate with like was like working group and moderator, and I was wondering how did you did this during the session, have less this like UIP vocabulary or something, because it was like you talked about like pre-session kind of communication, and I was wondering like how did this happen during the session?
Yes, so indeed in all of our documentation we use kind of new vocabulary. And actually, I don't remember if we had like a small vocabulary in the participant booklet itself. But somehow, you know, with all of the groups, participants, moderators, media team organizers, we used those terms and we used them quite often. So at the end, I didn't feel like it was kind of strange for them to use working group instead of committee. Somehow it came organically. So yeah, we started internally within the team. I think we kind of explained things, and I'm sure it was also explained to the moderators by the president, by Martin, that kind of this is how we do it. This is these are the words that we use, and then it worked pretty well. Yeah, sorry, nothing
No,
more.
it's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I will use your proposal to ask you about the topic that is relevant to your current job.
Mm-hmm.
So your position as innovation manager, and you work in the AIT health that connected so much into the health industry. So you already mentioned that the current crisis, of course, affects your work, but we don't understand like exactly how. So can you maybe give us a few examples of yeah, not such a specific examples, but at least somehow to understand like what is actually now the status of innovations in health and how coronavirus affects them directly.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So personally, as all of you probably, I'm affected that I work from home, and we had completely change in our timeline. Many events get canceled and so on. But on a broader perspective of healthcare innovation and overall healthcare landscape in Europe, what's happening is, of course, all the efforts are now focused on fighting the pandemic. It means that in order to launch a new product or service on the market in healthcare environment, you need to go through a specific set of steps. You need to usually go through a very kind of strong regulatory approvals for your product and service to make sure that it's safe, that it's, I don't know, tested, everything, right? So it's in order to use on humans. The change is that a lot of clinical trials, those trials that are needed to prove that your product or service that you plan to launch on the market is safe, that it delivers on the promise, it delivers the clinical outcomes that you expect it to deliver, that it can be used in humans, and so on. Majority of them are either postponed or canceled or not, you know, it's unclear what will happen with them, because now majority of the hospitals, majority of the medical personnel, they all focused on fighting the pandemic. So all of the clinical trials are now not connected to COVID-19, of course, are now in this on hold mode. And this really changes the timelines of launching the new products and services in the market. And of course, it might lead to the delays in many of the projects that we support, in many of the startups that work with us, because of the situation. That's kind of a more negative side, right? That now all of the efforts are put just in fighting the fire, you know, and not into growing a tree. At the same time, there are a lot of clinical, there are clinical trials, tests, and so on, focused on fighting the COVID-19 pandemic. We as EIT Health, we don't work with vaccines or drug development. So this is outside of our area of kind of focus. But as you know, there are some tests for the vaccines. There are some drugs that are being tested against the COVID. So this is something that is going on, and it moves very, very fast. And all the regulatory agencies, both in the States and in Europe, they really are supportive of that, right? So usually this process is very bureaucratic of launching a new product, service, drug, vaccine, anything medical on the market. But now the regulatory agencies are really supportive, and this might mean that some of those it can be not even a drug or a vaccine. Some of the updates to the ventilators, right? That everyone feels the lack of ventilators in the world right now. We don't have enough ventilators to help people at the intensive care units, and people die because of that. So all of this is now like has support, and will probably have a fast track to approval. At the same time, there are some drawbacks. So usually when you do things so fast, when you do such fast clinical trials, sometimes, you know, it's like there are some rules how you need to do, because clinical trial in a way is a little bit like research. You need to follow certain rules to make it scientifically valid. And there are some risks also associated with doing things so fast, but because it's just such a pressing need, I'm sure that some level of risk will be allowed, you know. And maybe the vaccine that we get in, I don't know, in 18 months, maybe it will have a little bit level of risk, so it will not be tested on like a huge number of people, but it still will be allowed to be used on people. So this is what's kind of on the positive side. There is a lot of support for everything connected to fighting COVID-19 pandemic. On the negative side, everything else is kind of in the stall mode, right? So on hold, waiting, not having enough people and resources that can go into that right now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for this insider view. I think it enriched our horizon about what we know about COVID-19, apart from seeing the events canceled. So some perspective from the industry. Great. So guys, do we have any more questions? So I guess not.
Just as my last slide, thank you for joining, and you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or I don't know. Yeah, probably LinkedIn is the best way to reach out to me. So.
Yes, Kseniya, so thank you so much for agreeing, taking this great chance to provide us your input. It was definitely very valuable, and I hope motivational for those of you whose activities got cancelled. It's not the end of the world, but you can make something special out of it, because it will be just standing outside of the system. Thank you so much to everyone who joined this webinar, and Kseniya, thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll see each other at some other EYP event or alumni related event.
Yes, definitely, and stay healthy, guys. Bye-bye.
Yes, truly.
Thank you.